Welcome, esteemed guests, partners
대회
and
기빈
speakers,
여러분,
and everyone
파트너
joining
여러분,
us
또
online.
연사 여러분,
I am
온라인으로
delighted
참가해
to be
주신
here
모든
with you
분들
today to
환영합니다.
introduce the
오늘
8th Nordic
제8회
Talks
노르딕
Korea
토크
of AI,
코리아가 진행이 됩니다.
Technology and
AI,
Democracy.
기술,
My name is
민주주의라는
Liz
주제를
Lee, and I am
다룹니다.
a founder and
저는
CEO of a
이현승입니다.
digital agency called Telepathy.
텔레파시의 공동
I am
설립자이자
also a co-managing
CEO이고요.
director of Girls
또
in Tech Korea,
Girls in
a
Tech
global
코리아의
nonprofit
공동
organization
지부장을
focused on
맡았습니다.
education
기술
and
분야에
empowerment of
종사하는
women in
여성들의
technology.
교육과
I will
인파워먼트를
be your
위해서
moderator
일하는
and
글로벌
anchor for
비영리
today's
기구입니다. 오늘 사회를 맡았습니다.
We are living in exciting
우리가
times
지금 현재
as we try
살아가고
to
있는
keep up
시대는 매우
with the quick paced
흥미진진합니다.
advances in
기술은
technology.
매우 빠른 속도로
Never
변하고
before
있습니다.
have we interacted
그
so
전에
closely
우리가
with
이렇게
a powerful
긴밀하게
new technology
신기술과
that can see,
상호작용한 적이
hear,
없었습니다.
decide,
이
recommend,
신기술을
and act
통해서
somewhat like
우리를
humans.
대신해서 보고
Like raising a
듣고
child,
추천을
we need to
해주기도 합니다.
constantly check
아이를
in
키우는
to see
것처럼
if our AI
계속
systems are
우리
learning the right
AI가
things
제대로
and
학습을
implementing
하고
what they learn
있는지
in the
또
direction
제대로
that
배운 대로
benefits the greater
실천하고
society.
있는지를
After
우리가
all, it
관리를
takes the
해줘야
global
합니다.
village to
결국
raise this child
이
called AI and
AI라는 아이를
technology.
키우기 위해서는
With that,
전체
we will open
지구촌
the
마을이
stage for a
필요한
global
것입니다.
dialogue today
글로벌
to address
대화를 이제
some
열어가도록
successes,
하겠습니다.
concerns, and some
성공
action
사례,
items that we can take
우려사항,
away.
그리고 또
So
어떤
thank you to
액션
Nordic Council of
아이템이 있는지를
Ministers,
보도록
Seoul
하겠습니다.
Metropolitan Government,
노르딕
Old Town
강요위원회,
Culture Park, the
서울특별시
Presidential Committee on the Fourth
문화비축기지
Industrial Revolution
제4차
for your role
산업혁명위원회
in realizing
여러분께
this event.
이번 행사를 가능하게
Before we
해주신 데
move
대해서
on with
감사의
the program, I would like to
말씀을
welcome
드립니다.
two
프로그램을
of
진행하기에
today's hosts as
앞서서
well as
오늘
panelists to the stage.
행사의
Ambassador
호스트이자
Jakob Hallgren from
패널리스트
Sweden
스웨덴
and Ambassador
대사님
Frode Solberg
야곱
from
할그렌
Norway.
대사님 그리고
The floor is
노르웨이
yours.
대사님 프로데 솔베르그
Well,
대사님을
thank you very
모시겠습니다.
much, Liz.
네,
It's
감사합니다.
really great to
이현승님.
have you on board. It's the
이렇게
first time we have
사회를
a professional
맡아주셔서
moderator
감사합니다. 이렇게
of this
전문적인
Nordic Talk
MC를
session.
노르딕
So, my name
토크에
is Jakob
저희가
Hallgren. I am
맞이한 게
the Swedish
처음입니다.
ambassador to
저는
Korea since some 3 years, and
3년
together with my dear
전부터
friend and
대사를
colleague Frode
해왔고요.
Solberg
또
here to my
노르웨이
right,
프로데
and
솔베르그
of course the other Nordic
대사님과
embassies in
함께
Korea.
또
We
한국에
are really
계신
so
다른
happy to
노르딕 국가
welcome you to this
대사들과
8th
함께
edition of the
제8차
Nordic
노르딕
Talks in
토크에 오신
Korea.
여러분을
And you
환영하는
might know,
바입니다.
if you were a
여러분도 잘
first-comer, maybe
아시겠지만
not, that this is actually
처음
a
오신 분들을
flagship
위해서
initiative by the
말씀드리겠습니다.
Nordic embassies in
노르딕
Korea. And it's part of a
주한
global
노르딕
campaign,
대사에서
as
진행을 하고
mentioned by
있는
you, Liz,
이니셔티브입니다. 그리고 또
sponsored and
노르딕
spearheaded by
강요위원회에서
the
진행을
Nordic
하고
Council of
있는
Ministers.
글로벌
And
캠페인의
since we
일환입니다.
launched this platform in
저희가 이
2019,
플랫폼을
it actually started here
2019년 한국에서
in Seoul.
론칭을
We have
했습니다.
had more than
서울에서 론칭을 한
1,000 offline
이후로
guests
오프라인
and reached more than
귀빈 1000명 그리고
200,000
또
people
SNS를
through social
통해서는
media. And I
20만
think we've
명에게
generated more than
다가갔고 또 이로
150
인해서
news
작성된 기사
articles.
숫자가
And the aim
150여
of these
편에 달하고
conversations
있습니다.
between the
저희가
Nordics and
노르딕
Korea
국가와 한국
is
간의
to
이
inspire
대화를
citizens
나누는데
to take
궁극적인
action for a more
목적은 더 지속 가능한
sustainable
사회를 위해서
society.
시민들이
And while
행동을
doing
하게끔
so,
촉구하는
we as
것입니다.
Nordics are
그렇게 하기
true to
위해서
the
저희
Nordic
노르딕
brand and maybe the
국가의
Nordic
브랜드에
values because we
충실한데요.
really share
그리고
them
또
all.
노르딕 가치를
Trust,
우리가 공유합니다.
compassion,
신뢰,
innovation,
연민,
openness and diversity are only some of them which unite us Nordics, and I'm sure our Korean friends as well, you in the audience. On a personal level, this event actually marks an end of a journey. It'll be the last time I personally participate in the Nordic Talks, because at the end of the summer I will be returning to Sweden as I'm wrapping up my duty here in Korea, and I will be happy to pass that role to my successor. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the Nordic Talks Korea from the beginning, and I'm also so pleased to see how far we've reached in these few years. So while today is then my last event, I'm happy to know that the Nordic Talks Korea journey will continue, and it will not end here, but rather continues, I wish and I hope, in many years to come.
Well, Jakob, I have to say, it's been, as you said, it's been quite a journey. And the journey will continue, but we will surely miss you here in Seoul. But the good thing with the Nordic, and I think that's talking whether it's the Nordic Talks or the Nordic concept, we will stay in contact anyway. But it's been quite a journey, and we have been actually hosting quite a few of these events together. And when I come to the old tanks, I feel a little bit at home. So it seems that this has come into play as a very, very good and frequent event, showing also the good combination of cooperation between the Nordic countries and the Republic of Korea. As you mentioned, all of our events, they use the platform of the Sustainable Development Goals. And today, we will go more into detail on SDG 16 and 17. And I would like to read that because they're quite important. They promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions on all levels. And also strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Important objectives. Today, we will get insights and we will discuss how governments and tech giants are defining the future of humankind and how technology is doing good for societies, for industries, and the whole global village, and also for the planet that we live on. We have a great speaker lineup, and not least, we have our audience that we need commitment and engagement from. We expect you to be actively engaged in today's program, and if you want to, you can also raise and post your own personal call to action on the digital platform. Regardless of which platform you're using, please remember to use the hashtag Nordic Talks Korea. That's important. And I would also like to remind you to join our growing Nordic Talks Korea community by signing up at www.nordictalkskorea.com. Now, we have an exciting day, we have an exciting program ahead, so let me leave the floor to you, Liz.
Thank you, Frode. Now, for today's first keynote, Anne-Marie Engtoft Larsen is Denmark's tech ambassador. She is responsible for representing the Danish government to the global tech industry and in global governance forums on emerging technologies under the pioneering initiative called the Techplomacy. Prior to her appointment, Anne-Marie worked at the World Economic Forum, where she led the work on the Fourth Industrial Revolution and global public goods. Anne-Marie has also co-founded an innovation house for student entrepreneurship and worked as political advisor in the Danish Parliament. Today, Anne-Marie will talk about democracy in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. If you have questions for Anne-Marie, please make sure to raise them on the live stream website page. It is a great privilege to welcome all the way from Silicon Valley, live, Anne-Marie Engtoft Larsen.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you to Nordic Talks. Wherever you're viewing this from. My name is Anne-Marie Larsen. It's a pleasure to be here. I have the privilege of talking for the next 10 minutes about the intersection between democracy and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I think a really important place to start this is in the question of what is the relationship between emerging technologies and our society? Because when we think back on the last 250 years of technological change, we often think, we think about the technologies it's given us, the gadgets that we have on us, not necessarily how it's transformed our society. But let me take us back to the first industrial revolution 250 years ago. This is the harnessing of steam power. This is where we went from manual labor to starting to have factories. But that was not only a steam power revolution. It was not only a matter of mechanics. It also changed our society dramatically. We moved from rural areas to cities, we urbanized, we started living much closer together, and we started seeing new formations of political parties. And even some of the earliest governments that we know really came from the fact that we moved and shifted the way that we lived. Moving up 150 years or so to the second industrial revolution, this was the harnessing of electricity, scientific principles. It gave us the radio, it gave us the TV, it gave us modern medicine. And while we might think of that as also, mass consumption, mass production, big factories, it also changed society. It was some of the first aspects that we know of democracy. So at least from Denmark, where I'm from, we started just seeing unions coming up of this. We started to interacting much more with the world around us because the technologies that the second industrial revolution gave us allowed us to see out in the world. This internationalization also had a big impact on how we are ruling and governing the world. So rather than just having bilateral agreements, we started doing multilateral. We started working in big organizations that was starting to, I think, identify and address the fact that technology allowed us to be much closer together. Then moving to the third industrial revolution, about 60, 70 years ago, this is a digital revolution. This is the first, from the first AI to the first computers, this digital revolution changed a ton of how we are, about how we live, how we're producing, but it also changed our society. It made it much more digital. It allowed us to communicate much faster, and it challenged our democracy in so many radical ways. The fact that we could communicate in a whole different way that we haven't been used to before. Looking at journalism today, the fact that we can see whatever is happening around the globe always, that changed our dynamics for how the public and democratic debate in the society is. And up until today, the fourth industrial revolution, it leaves a big question on all these technological aspects of an industrial revolution. It's changing how we work, but it's also changing how we live. It's changing how we govern our society. And in this revolution, I think there are three things that we really need to be focused on, making sure that the fourth industrial revolution supports rather than undermining our democracy. The first one is to ask yourself the question, who wins from this revolution? How do we make sure that the benefits are equally shared? What came out of the last 250 years of industrialization has been a massive progress for people around the world. Not only value creation for the few, but for the many. It lifted people out of poverty, and it allowed much more people to have a voice in our society. How do we make sure that that's part of the fourth industrial revolution too going forward? The second question is, who loses? For stable democracies, we need to address some of the biggest challenges of our time, climate change not least being one of them. And while the last 250 years gave us immense opportunity, it came with unprecedented growth, it did come at a massive cost to our environment, to our global climate. So as we're looking forward and asking ourselves, how do we make sure that the technologies we develop are not only creating a better world today, but one for future generations? One where democracies will be thriving rather than scrambling over whatever might be left in a warming world. And thirdly, how do we make sure that this is human-centered? Democracies are ultimately based on humans thriving, allowing us to interact with each other, understand each other, get closer to each other, discuss, debate, and I think most importantly, make sure that we feel a certain ownership over our own life and empowerment to help make decisions. So this question about how do we make the fourth industrial revolution human-centered, ensuring that this technological change is actually going to benefit us. And I think it's one of the most interesting questions to be asking ourselves when we talk about modern technologies. Is this ultimately going to make us more free, more happy, live more meaningful lives, more sustainable lives, more accountable lives, more democratic lives? Is this strengthening our ability to understand each other as a society? So when we look into the fourth industrial revolution, and we have quite an opportunity here, for the first, the second, and the third revolution, we've always been looking at them, looking back. We've been talking about how history was. Now, for the first time, we're on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution with the opportunity to look into the future and say, how about we design not only the technology we develop, but how we disseminate it, how we use it, how we govern it to make a society that live up to those values. So that's why Denmark's technological diplomacy is with the mandate of ensuring a more responsible, democratic, trustful, and secure technological revolution. We recently launched a new strategy for Denmark's tech diplomacy, and in that, democracy stands as one of the key pillars. Denmark here says that we will champion global digital rules and regulations that build on democratic values and human rights. That we will insist on a path forward that is not taking democracy for granted, but that is actively supporting it, making it thrive, building it, showing that these are some of the strongest values that we have in common. And we do that both on a European digital leadership that's based on democratic values, and that's with collaboration with partners all over the world, from the US here where I am, to Korea, to all those nations where we share, I think, the same sentiment of values around us. And the second one is about ensuring that human rights is not only something we talk about out in the offline real world, but it has to apply in the online world as well. So let me leave you with, I think, a few principles for how we're seeing how can we ensure this happens in the future. First of all, we should think about systems, not the technologies. If we focus only on the technology, I think we miss the bigger picture, the one where that technology has a much bigger impact on how our society functions. Take artificial intelligence, for example. If we only look at artificial intelligence in a very, very small, siloed way, we won't get the bigger picture of how AI on a systemic level, when it is everything from our education to our judiciary systems to how we're governing our families, this will have a big impact. So think about the systems that it's creating rather than only the technologies. Secondly, how do we make sure that this becomes empowering, not determining? Empowering, that means that we, ordinary citizens, politicians, people in government like myself, people in the private sector, in the startups, those who are investing, those in civil society, educators, researchers, all of us, how do we make sure that the fourth industrial revolution is not only something that happens, it doesn't feel like a big freight train coming with 250 kilometers an hour, and you only have one decision to jump on or jump off, but rather something that people feel empowered to partake in, to help shape, that it is not something that is foreign, but that's part of us. And then how do we make sure we do this by design and not by default? If we simply say, oh, this was an unintended consequence, we miss the bigger picture. We have an opportunity to design technologies, to design systems around technologies, to design governance around technologies by design, by making sure they live up to being inclusive, human-centered, sustainable, more democratic, allowing more people to participate. And finally, and I think this is a really big one, we need to treat value as a feature, not as a bug. This means that values should be discussed. So when we talk technology, we shouldn't immediately jump to talk about the technical specificity. We should talk about what are some of the values that are guiding us from we first come on the idea to we develop them, to we invest in them, to we spread them out in our society, to we use them and evaluate them. Talking about values to start at a high level politically in the boardroom, but also among ordinary citizens at home, at the kitchen table, in schools, and making sure that the technology of our future holds the values that we hold dear. So with those 4 principles in mind, I look forward to a conversation, and I'm looking forward to discussion on what are some of your thoughts on this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Before we move on to the discussion part, we have a short introduction from our first Korean speaker and panelist. Sung-no Yoon is a highly respected AI and big data expert, the 2 essential pillars driving the fourth industrial revolution. Besides being the chairperson of the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, he holds a professorship at the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Seoul National University. He has published a number of highly cited research papers and won a number of awards, prizes, and recognitions both in Korea and internationally. Today, Sung-no will talk about how the fourth industrial revolution will bring us a better future. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to introduce Sung-no Yoon.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Actually, I'm a Seoul native, but I've never been here before. But I've been to Finland and Sweden. I'm looking forward to visiting Denmark and Norway. So I see more European people here than Koreans. So I feel like, being in Northern European country now. So even though my staff prepared a very carefully written script in English, I don't think I can cover all the contents in 6 minutes or so. So if it's possible, I'd like to speak in Korean so that I can deliver contents better, actually, in a limited time. How about that? Okay. 오늘 이렇게 만나 뵙게 돼서 반갑고요. 아까 말씀드린 바와 같이 제가 북유럽에 있는 것 같은 그런
It feels like
느낌입니다.
I'm
오늘
in
제가
the
준비한 내용은
Nordic
이제
country,
이제 정부하고 민간이 같이 이제
I
꾸려나가고 있는
would
위원회가
like to talk
있습니다.
about
4차
the Fourth Industrial
산업혁명위원회이고요.
Revolution Presidential
거기에
Committee,
이제 위원장으로서
and I
제가
am
그간
one
해왔던
of the
일들 그리고
co-chairpersons,
코로나로 인한
and
팬데믹,
I'd like to
초래한
talk
상황들에
about
대한 저의
the
생각을
situation
말씀드리고자
caused by
합니다.
COVID-19 and how the committee
일단
dealt with
이
it.
슬라이드를
And
보시면
looking at
이제
this
기본적으로 한국의 소득이
In
지속적으로
Korea,
늘어나고 있어요.
the income
그럼에도
per capita
불구하고
is growing,
우리는 더
but
이상 우리가 잘
nonetheless,
산다, 뭐
we don't
중산층이다라고
feel
느끼는
that
비율이
we're
계속
well-to-do.
감소하고
People
있고요.
who feel that they're
그리고
in the
코로나나
middle
여러
class
가지
is
상황 변화로
decreasing,
인해서
and because of many
사람들이
changes,
느끼는
including
불안감 이런
COVID-19,
것들은 커지고
many
있고요.
people feel more
그래서 특히
insecure.
이제 4차 산업혁명,
And
인공지능이나
with the
빅데이터
Fourth Industrial
같은 4차
Revolution,
산업혁명으로
including
인해서
AI and
우리의
big
일자리가
data,
영향받는 거
our
아니냐라는
jobs
우려가
are
큰
being
것이
affected.
사실입니다.
That is the biggest concern people
그리고
have.
여러 가지 인더스트리를
And
보면
if we look at
이제
the many
구글이나
industries, if we look
애플도
at
마찬가지고
Google and
유튜브나 넷플릭스도
Apple,
마찬가지인데
YouTube and
더 이상
Netflix,
하나의 업에
likewise,
머무르기보다는
they don't
여러
just stay
업종
within
간의
one vertical.
융합이나 이런 것들이
They
이루어지고
go
있고
they go
한국의
through
이제
many
카카오도
convergence, and we
마찬가지고
have
네이버도 마찬가지고
Kakao and
이런 디지털
Naver,
기반의
similar
어떤
companies
경쟁이
in
이제
Korea.
무한으로 치닫고
There is going to
있습니다.
be limitless competition that they're
사람들이
faced
느끼는
with.
일자리에 대한
And so
불안, 그리고
people
새로운
feel
기술의
insecure
출현으로
about
인해서
jobs,
우리는
and with the
새로운
emergence of
환경에
new
놓여 있다라고 볼 수
technologies,
있겠습니다.
we are living in a new
기존에 이제
environment.
경제나 여러 가지
in
중요한 사업
the-
이런 걸 하기 위해서 손꼽히던 그런 것이
in the
이제
conventional paradigm, we
노동,
needed to have
자본이었는데요.
land, labor,
그것이
capital
이제 이런 4차
to
산업혁명
succeed in
시대에
economy, but
더불어서
in
이제
the
좀
Fourth
바뀌어
Industrial
나가고 있는 것
Revolution,
같습니다. 예를 들면
these
이제
input factors are changing.
노동이라기보다는
Instead
어떤
of labor,
개개인의 경쟁력 이런
we
것이
call
중요하고요.
it
그리고
individual
데이터,
competitiveness, and
그다음에
we
여러
need
가지
data,
지능적인 그런
and we also need
financial resources, smart
resources,
capital이라고 여기서
financial
부르는데
resources, or
이런 것들이 이제 보다
smart
중요한
capital.
시대가 되었고요.
And so these are becoming
시간이
more
정말 빨리
important.
갑니다. 4분밖에 안
And I only have 4 minutes
자,
left.
그래서 저희
is flying.
이제
And
여러 가지
so
상황 변화가 있었고
we've had a
지금
lot
현재
of
정부가
changes
출범할 당시에 이제
happening,
4차
and
산업혁명이라는 말이
the Presidential
만들어졌고
Committee on
사실은
the
그
Fourth
전에도
Industrial
한국이
Revolution
열심히
was
이
formed.
분야에서
Even
많은
before the
성과를
committee,
이루어왔습니다만
we had a lot of
시대적인
achievements
요구에
in
부응하고자
regards to
4차
Fourth Industrial
산업혁명위원회가
Revolution, but
생겨났습니다.
to
그래서 원래는 이제
cater to the
5개 부처의
needs
장관이
and changing
참여하는 그런
times, we had the
위원회였는데
committee
이제
made,
올해부터 조금 확대된
and
편이
we
되어서
had 5
저하고 저는
ministers
민간
heading
위원장이고
the committee, but
국무총리께서
we have
이제
expanded that, so we have
정부를
2
대표하시는
chairmen.
그리고
I am
총
the
12개
co-chairman
부처의
representing the
장관이
private sector,
참여하는
and we have the
그리고 약
prime
20명의
minister
전문가가
from the
참여하는
government sector,
위원회를
and we have
활동을
more
해가고
ministers and government
그리고
leaders,
우리
and also
몸을
members
이루는
from the private
핵심적인
sector
정보
that
물질이 DNA
are on the committee.
근데
And
이제 한국에서는 이런 키워드
we
만드는 걸 좋아하는 것
like
같습니다. 저도
acronyms
외국에서
in
오래
Korea.
생활을 했지만
I have
한국에서
lived
이런
abroad
키워드
quite a
만드는 걸
lot,
좋아하는
and
것 같은데
Koreans have the knack for making up acronyms. And so DNA stands for Data, Network, and AI, and they are the core technologies making up the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and we are paying a lot of attention to these verticals. The reason why I named the title Back to the Future, Better Future is because I'm sure you're all familiar with the movie Back to the Future. So we are experiencing an unprecedented times, and we're experiencing the future that has been accelerated because of COVID-19. But we did experience the future, but time is flying, and we will be faced with another future. So with the lessons learned, we need to welcome a better future, and we will be prepared when that comes. And we need to deal with some issues, and I would like to share them with you. One is one of the core technologies in Fourth Industrial Revolution is AI, and it has a lot of virtues, and that's why we are paying a lot of attention to it and investing in it. But there are some side effects to AI. Rather than being a side effect, we need to pay more attention and take care of AI for it to be democratic, and we need to be mindful of privacy issues. And democracy-wise, we're doing well in Korea. Korea used to be a manufacturing powerhouse, and on top of that, we have some strengths and achievements in the ICT industries. And another key word made up by Koreans is 3B, semiconductors and batteries. and so system semiconductor and biomedical products, and they're called the big threes. And these industries are being fostered, and many efforts are being made into driving the fourth industrial revolution with these industries. I had a small chat with the ambassador, and carbon neutrality is becoming a hot issue, and Korea is paying a lot of attention to it. And as for the advanced technologies in the fourth industrial revolution, they will be able to contribute to carbon neutrality, and there are a lot of challenges to be dealt with. I know there will be jobs that will be decreased and that will go away, but there will be new jobs that will be created, and so people will have better, decent jobs and will be able to enjoy a better quality of life. And as for the future of jobs, there have been many studies conducted. With innovation and inclusion, if there's a balance, I think a better future will be ahead of us. And so this was a fast delivery of my presentation. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Sang-ro. We've just heard. Hello. Thank you, Sang-ro. We've just heard two excellent keynotes. Anne-Marie gave us an overview of the different industrial revolutions and how both top-down and grassroots levels need to work together in designing systems that will empower our future with the technology. And Sang-ro gave specific example of how Korea is working with the private and the public sector moving forward with this transition. Now, I would like to set the scene for the first Nordic Talks of the afternoon. We will have a conversation about governments and tech giants defining the future of humankind. Please welcome again our two inspirational speakers, Anne-Marie and Toft Larsen, Denmark's tech ambassador, joining us live all the way from Silicon Valley, and Sang-ro Yoon, chairperson of the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Also, a very warm welcome to the panel, Jakob Hallgren, ambassador of Sweden to Korea. Today's session is a relaxed dialogue among our panelists as well as our audience. So please engage and take part in the discussion by raising questions on the live stream website. Towards the end of the discussion, we will select some of the questions and bring them to our discussion. So, shall we begin? As we have just heard from Anne-Marie and Sang-ro, some of today's most far-reaching societal changes are driven by technological disruption. Artificial intelligence, big data, social media, Internet of Things, at times grouped together as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, are transforming almost all sectors of society with an unprecedented speed, and impacting not only domestic markets, but also the global balance of power and established values and institutions. Jakob, you represent a democratic and tech-savvy nation. Can you share some insights into the Swedish trends or initiatives related to the public-private cooperation?
Thank you, Liz, with a lot of pleasure, and also like to thank two speakers, Anne-Marie and Sang-ro, for very inspiring introductions to our panel discussion here. This is obviously a very wide area with so many applications and implications, but if I should choose three areas where we have looked particularly on AI in Sweden. I'd like to mention issues around ethic and democracy, as Anne-Marie was alluding to, research, what type of research we're doing in Sweden, and then maybe some words about education, which I think is extremely important. So firstly, on ethics and democracy, what we've done in Sweden is to appoint a particular committee that is looking into the issues of ethics and technological innovation. All technologies can be used for good and bad, and this maybe more than many have a lot of ethical considerations. So this is actually a government committee, not unlike the presidential committee here in Korea, with consisting of people like social investors, historians, authors, ethic experts, civil society, research funding, etc. And what they're trying to do is to identify policy challenges and contributing to reducing the uncertainty of existing regulations. I think regulations are sometimes underestimated when it comes to technological changes. Policy innovation in regulations is also incredibly important on how to be able to accelerate our policies in light of these new challenges that the fourth industrial revolution is posing. And the president of this committee has actually been here in Korea. He was particularly interested in the sandbox concept. You have like regulatory sandboxes here in Korea, which are quite interesting and exciting. And then secondly, on research in Sweden, there's actually huge investments, I'm sure also in the other Nordic countries, but both from the government and from the private sector. And one particular case in point is a special initiative spearheaded and funded by the Wallenberg family, the Swedish chaebol, if you will, called WASP, Wallenberg Autonomous Systems Program. And they're also cooperating with a research institute in Sweden called RISE. And issues that they are looking at, which is also maybe very interesting to look at the practical implementation of AI. Also coming back to what I think Anne-Marie, you said about the green transition and challenges. So, for instance, they're looking at how to optimize logistics, using AI on how to optimize logistics in the sense that reducing air. All these transports are going back and forth. They transport a lot of air. How do you do to reduce that? Another thing is precision farming. How do you increase yield in farming by using AI technologies? And another thing, which is also extremely important for the green sustainability, is renovating in more energy efficient ways. All of these are areas where we are researching or using AI and research in AI, how that could be used. Another area more related to social science is disinformation. A big area, a big issue, as we've seen over the last few years in the elections, etc. And the final thing I'd like to say from the Swedish point of view is the importance of education. It was actually in Finland that this wonderful initiative started called an education of elements of AI. It's a free-for-all education online that everyone can take, which has to do with getting to know AI, getting to know the challenges of AI, and how you work responsibly with AI. So when I prepared for this seminar, I actually started taking that course. It's a wonderful course. It's available not only in Swedish and the Nordic countries, but also in English. So I can really highly recommend it. And I think it would be wonderful if we could see such a course in Korea as well. And I think that goes back to what Anne-Marie says, making sure that it becomes highly democratic, and the implementation is to the service of our democracies and the values rather than anything else. So these are some inputs from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Sangro, you are running a committee, just like Jakob mentioned. And are there similarities or differences that you see and here? And
yeah, of course, there are a lot
priorities?
Go ahead, sorry.
Go.
I should, listen to the question.
No, go ahead, please. Are there any similarities and differences? And if there are priorities?
Of course, yeah. Actually, in our committee, we are doing our best in order to find the best balance between the innovations as well as, how can I say, the job issues, social impacts, and so on. So as an, innovator, or to be more precise, as an educator who is educating future innovators, I have been, thought that innovation is the first value in, our society. But, becoming the chairperson of this committee, I am now feeling that social impact is really important. Also we have to care a lot about the privacy issues as well. But one of the misunderstandings from the Western countries probably about Korea is that Korea is developing AI technologies ignoring privacy and human rights, which is not correct at all. We are, creating regulations which are even stronger than those used in Europe, like GDPR and so on. So we are not like other, some of the Asian countries where maybe, data are being collected at a large amount, maybe, ignoring human rights and privacy. Korea is not like that. We are doing our best in order to find the best balance between technological innovation and social impact, including privacy, democracy, and so on. So I think that in that line, Nordic countries and Korea have a lot of common points. Also, we put a lot of values on privacy and so on. So in terms of priority, maybe the same. Yeah. Also in terms of technology, as I said, Koreans like creating keywords like DNA, Big Three, and so on. And I think we are doing great in terms of those technological areas. I have not using English for like 7 years or something, so my English is like, anyhow. So I think that in terms of priority, we share the same value. And in terms of technology, we are putting a lot of efforts in order to make our already strong manufacturing capabilities and ICT, AI, big data, and so on.
Thank you. I will have a question for Anne-Marie. Based on your many, many meetings with American, Asian, and European tech giants and governments, where do you think we as a global society are headed towards? Do you think we are on the right track with ensuring a balance in defining our common future, or are there points of improvements that you see?
I mean, this is a massive question, Liz. I think overall right now, some of the main discussion that we're seeing around emerging technologies are much more on the concerning sides. There are questions around how to make sure that the technological revolution becomes more responsible, more secure, that it does not undermine democracy, that, as a private citizen, as a consumer, how is my data stored, how is it protected? A lot of what actually I think Sungro just spoke to. And while I got to say, I've actually been following the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Korea for ever since it was started, and I think Korea was one of the first countries to have a much more holistic approach to this. And now what we're seeing is that the rest of the world is catching up. I mean, we're catching up. We're seeing governments that for a long time, and this is globally, we have allowed technologies, and particularly a few very, very large technology companies, to develop without any regulation. And now we are seeing a change in that. It's both from a demand from citizens, and it's also a political pressure on making sure that looking forward, we need to make sure that there is transparency, that there is rule of law, that there is privacy, that there is security. And that is regardless of we're talking disinformation, misinformation, these campaigns that are potentially undermining our democracy, to the questions around how do we ensure free speech, human rights, to the questions such as facial recognition, some of these AI aspects that I think a lot of people are starting to question what are the downsides versus the upsides. So that is coming up for, that's how I see the political environment. Sitting here in Silicon Valley, they also read the newspapers. And we're starting to see a tech sector that is increasingly feeling that pressure and starting to do something about it. We are far from in a perfect place. Much more has to be done, and that's both on the regulating side, but also on the business side. But if we're looking at some of the recent things, whether it's the updates to Facebook's newsfeed, whether it is the new Apple iOS update that allows the user to have much more privacy, we are starting to see, I think, quite tectonic shift on how we are protecting citizens' data and how we're developing technologies. But I still think we have a far way to go. I think one of the most promising things as a European is to see how Europe has taken quite a strong leadership not only in making sure that our markets are functioning and operating on a good level. I think the whole antitrust of the aspect of competition, it's not about taking down big companies. It's about allowing new startups, innovators to actually get their products and services to the market. But EU is also leading, I think, on the regulatory debate, making sure that our content online, our markets, our democracy is safeguarded in a technological future.
Thank you. I guess this is a question to any one of you. So AI is rapidly becoming a battlefield and shifting global balance of power. Are there concrete examples that come up to your mind, and if you want to share and discuss? Sang-ryo?
Yeah, there are a lot of examples of that kind of intimidating technologies. For example, I think that many of you already know the technology called GPT-3, made by OpenAI, and I'm not sure, though, you know about the hardware resources required for developing that kind of large-scale AI systems. It's enormous. So I think that the United States, is advancing the level of the art to the very high level, and the other countries on the globe are chasing it. But it's not easy to catch up that kind of high level of resources, as well as the volume of data used and so on. But without developing such a strong AI technology, it may not be easy for us to find a chance to win again in the near future in terms of AI-dominated industry and so on. So I'm really worried about the fact that the direction of state-of-the-art in AI is going toward the direction of using a lot of resources, hardware, software, and data. Yeah, so I'm concerned a lot about that.
Would you like to make a comment, Jakob?
I would like to make a comment, but let's give the floor to Anne-Marie first.
Anne-Marie?
Well, I think just a major thing, when I'm looking at the global AI race, so artificial intelligence, I mean, we came a long way from Alan Turing's prediction from the 1950s to where we are today. I see today's AI race, especially between the US and China, to be compared with the 20th century space race. There are massive investments that are not only defining the development of artificial intelligence, but I think it's going to be defining economic capabilities. I think it's going to be a defining factor of how our entire markets and how our industries are functioning. And it's massive investments also in defense capabilities. So I think some of the bifurcation that we're seeing right now, I mean, whether we're talking AI patents, whether we're talking AI research, whether we're talking the top 100 journals globally, the massive lion's share is coming from the US, followed very, very closely by China. In a few of the aspects, actually, Korea is number 3. But a lot of countries, whether we're talking the UK, Germany, the Nordics, Europe as a whole, not to mention Latin America, Southeast Asia, the African continent, are falling behind quite dramatically. So we need to find a way to make sure that this AI race is used for good. Because I think when we talk about AI, it is the opportunity to help us in climate change and social inclusion and better education and better healthcare. But right now, a lot of money is going into the defense capabilities and I think to some of the malicious use of AI. So finding a way to governing that and to making sure that just as the space race took us to the moon, the same should happen with the AI race. It should be used for the positive of humanity and not only for defense capabilities.
Yes, I agree. Technology is never good or bad inherently. Technology just is. It is really up to the human beings and how we direct how we use technology for our daily lives. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, Anne-Marie, what I wanted to say, what you just said at the end is a good segue into what I wanted to say about this. My background is security and partly defense policy. So when in my previous job, I looked quite a lot at the issue of lethal autonomous weapons systems and how AI is actually used to revolutionize warfare. For instance, in the use of nuclear weapons and how quickly you can respond, but also to the issues of potential autonomous drones that is used by resourceful countries, but strangely enough, it could maybe also be used by not so resourceful countries. Drones in the air or autonomous vehicles in or under or below sea level. And there's a lot of issues connected to that, or what is popularly maybe called as killer robots. How do you govern development of those? I know that is discussed within the framework of working groups in the UN, but unfortunately quite slowly. So to me that is maybe a case for concern, even though I fully agree with what both of you have said, that we really need to make sure that these technologies are used in a responsible way. Strangely enough, some of the military commanders are afraid of weapons that are used autonomously, because then they do not have control any longer, and that is maybe the best reason for why they would agree to restrain that development. But that's clearly apropos your question about geopolitical or geostrategical applications of this new technology.
Now, shall we turn to the audience and take some questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, my first question is from someone who is a bit worried when we use AI to support, for example, infrastructure, or when we try to make our cities smarter. So what kind of countermeasures should states employ in order to protect crucial infrastructure against, for example, cyber attacks?
So the question talks about how technology in the infrastructure, the smart cities, and as individuals, we can be worried about cybersecurity, and if my data is open to anyone who has access, how do we deal with that? Anne-Marie, would you like to take?
Absolutely. So look, I mean, cyber attacks, what we're seeing right now, it's not only a potential threat, it's a very active, very live, very real threat that we are experiencing across the world already. From the NotPetya and the WannaCry attacks that, at least in Denmark, actually hit a lot of not only big industries and companies, but also our digital infrastructure. It had a massive impact. Looking recently, SolarWinds, the big exchange hack as well, we're seeing how even some of the biggest companies, they have even not, they didn't even see this coming. So when we talk about our digital infrastructure, we need to start talking about our critical digital infrastructure. Everything from our hospitals to our electricity grid to how our various societies are functioning are increasingly digitized. And I think we need to pay I think we need to be paying a much more attention to how to make sure that there is a lot more security in those systems. And that requires us to start thinking, I think both from a state and a government perspective, how do we invest massively in the security of this? Two, how do we increase the public-private collaboration? Because often this is not only public or private side, but it is a deep collaboration between different vendors, between different service agreements. So how do we make it much more connected? And then thirdly, cybersecurity should not only be for those sitting in the military academies. This should be a conversation among ordinary citizens. How do you increase your security? And that's everything from how to increase your password awareness to understanding how your devices are connected to various pieces, because cybersecurity in an increasingly digitized society where everything is online, everything is connected, and where one malicious user, one malicious state can so easily turn on that button and have a catastrophic impact on society, we need to have a much stronger collaboration on that.
Shall we move on to the next question?
We can. Then we have someone who asked if there is a need for an international organization to coordinate government policies and ensure that the fourth industrial revolution is human-centered.
So the question was, do we need an international, like a committee that exists in each of our countries? is there a need for an international one that governs how technology is used? Would you like to take it?
I think maybe Sungro is better suited to reply to this. I mean, I know there are guidelines that have been developed within the framework of OECD. The EU has also done similarly, so there are indeed no lack of guidelines for how to deal with those issues. I don't think we've yet seen, well, definitely not an international organization, but maybe what could be conceived in the future are agreements or conventions. I alluded to the work that is happening within the UN on autonomous weapon systems. So I guess that could be a start, but I don't exactly know what the status is. Maybe you know.
Well, I know there are several academic alliances in AI, but I'm not aware of any, organization in the government level. I don't know. So.
Anne-Marie, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question, because I think it recognizes that these challenges are global and they require a global response. What makes me optimistic, I think, is to see, first of all, as we talked about, the OECD is moving, quite advanced on the question of a global digital taxation. We're seeing the UN, they had their new, the UN, I think it was called the Digital Roadmap. So actually with the Secretary General and in his office, a roadmap on how to think about technology, how to address technological changes. We see on Tuesday, tomorrow, there will be a meeting between the EU and the US to set up a new tech and trade council. And that's also to discuss artificial intelligence and discuss, how to make the regulation of the digitization. And then we have a lot of standard setting bodies, from the International Telecommunications Union to the ISO standards. But I think one thing we're missing, and I think one thing that's particularly interesting, is we lack a global jurisdiction. So if we are to say, look, we want to have the rule of law guiding the development of technologies, the dissemination of technologies, but we lack a global jurisdiction. Right now, it's up to every individual country, or in our case, the European Union, to follow up on that. But the challenge is that this is global companies, massive global companies, spanning multiple time zones, spanning multiple countries. So I think we still need to figure out what is the most efficient, effective way to allow ordinary users and citizens to feel empowered to making sure that when they vote and government make rules, that those rules are actually also lived up to, that there is accountability. So this question of the lack of global jurisdiction, I think for now we need to depend on those multilateral organizations, the UN, the World Trade Organization, the ITU, the OECD, the European Union, and a stronger collaboration among the democracies of this world.
And I think just a global dialogue like this event that we're having today, I think addresses the importance of having continuous discussion regarding these major issues. With that, I'm looking at the time, and I think we have to wrap up. So it's important to go on. Talking about and planning is one thing, and to move on to the next level, we need to turn thoughts into actions. With that said, I want to go around the panel and hear from each one of you what action can we, the Nordics and Korea, take in order to contribute to achieving possible, responsible, democratic, technological development. What call to action or final statements do you want to highlight? Jakob?
Thank you, and thank you for great moderation, a great discussion. I would like to go back to one of the 3 points that I mentioned in the beginning, and that is the importance of education for all in this crucial field. I cannot enough stress the importance of that. I did mention these elements of AI education, which is already out there available. You can simply find it on the internet, and anyone can attend to and do that course. I think the purpose of spreading the knowledge and demystifying, de-dramatizing for the wider, audience, wider people is so important, because this is a tool that's going to be there for everybody to use. So I'd like to, that's my call to action. Educate yourselves. Go and do the Elements of AI course.
Sang-do?
Yeah, actually, I cannot agree more with Jakob's opinion that education is really important. And I'm an educator,
Okay,
so educating future, talents is really important, and Korean government and the Korean education institutes all know that, and we are trying our best to do that. But it's not easy, actually. And also, in continuation with what Jakob just said, I think that collaboration, international collaboration, is a key as well. For example, Korea is strong at manufacturing and ICT, and European countries are very good at, how can I say, there are so many good things like, energies and environmental technologies and so on. So I think that there is there should be a lot of opportunities for, Korea and Nordic countries to collaborate in the future, near future. Yeah.
And last but not least, Anne-Marie.
I love those Sungro and Jacob's excellent points around education. So let me add the final one, I think, from a government perspective. How do we increase our bilateral connections, relationship, and not just to discuss what we normally discuss, but the values around how we're seeing a technological future? I believe that conversations, especially among democracies, in a world where democratic values are often taken for granted, they're losing ground somewhere, I still believe it is the strongest, best possible system to have. I think we need to come together in ensuring that some of the values that we hold dear, how can they be built into these technological systems? How can they shape everything from how we encourage innovation to how we are shaping our regulation? And I think learning from each other, and that's why I think what Korea has done with the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, how do we learn from that? How do we connect from legislator to legislator, policymaker to policymaker, private sector to private sector, and ensuring that we have much more of these conversations? Because I think between the Nordics and Korea, we have so much more that binds us together than divides us. And making sure that if this is to become a truly human-centered, inclusive, sustainable, more meaningful technological revolution, it requires us to collaborate, and that will hopefully also pave the way for global solutions in this space.
Thank you. We will now take a short break before moving on with the second session. When we come back, we will take a deep dive into two prominent companies and their take on AI, transparency, and governance, and big data as a key driver for business growth. Thank you. Welcome back to the 8th Nordic Talks Korea of AI, Technology, and Democracy. Our second session of the event offers 2 concrete examples of how tech can make a positive impact on society, industries, and the planet Earth. Our next speaker is Mary Hataya, the CEO of Sido, a platform for teams who want to make their AI transparent and explainable. Sidot's AI governance and risk management platform is used by major public and private organizations, such as the cities of Amsterdam and Helsinki, to operate their AI registers and communicate openly of their AI. Prior to starting her own company, Mary was leading AI strategy and GDPR implementation in OP Financial Group, the largest financial services firm in Finland. And before that, she did analytics and AI consulting with Accenture Analytics. Today, Mary will share insights on how private businesses and public organizations can become digitally sustainable and develop a responsible AI and ESG ecosystem. Should you have questions for Mary, please raise them on the live stream website page. Please welcome from Finland, live, Mary Hataya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I find this is an amazing opportunity to connect between the Nordics and Korean companies and markets. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope you can see my screen well. Yeah, thanks for the introduction as well. My company is 3 years old, a company we started after noticing that AI is being taken to use in so many different areas of our societies, and it has also huge impacts on how our societies work. So we really work with public and private sector customers, organizations. Our platform is used by these organizations to put in place AI registers in order to systematically govern the AI systems, do systematic documentation, technical documentation, and to share this information with various different stakeholders. What I wanted to discuss with you today is how we can use ESG as a platform for building AI trust and transparent communication. With ESG, I'm referring to, many of you know, the letters come from environmental, social, and governance aspects, the ways how companies' non-financial performance can be reported and analyzed to support the financial performance related evaluation in, for example, investment decisions. So AI is really everywhere, as we have been discussing already in this session earlier today. Over the past few years, we have quickly taken AI into use in so many high-stake uses, from healthcare to transport, education, recruiting, financial services, public services, and, for example, law enforcement. AI also impacts in unprecedented scale. When integrated into products and services used by millions and 100 millions, even billions of users around the world, the social impacts of our technology easily exceeds any other aspects of corporate social impact in scale. Looking into the past, we haven't always been very successful in anticipating these impacts. Instead, besides of creating opportunities and benefits for so many people, for some people, AI has closed job opportunities, have given unjust ratings in school, or manipulated how we use our democratic rights, for example, in elections. It is no wonder that companies who use AI around the world, as well as public organizations, are facing growing demands for transparency on how their AI impacts our societies. These demands come from various different directions. First of all, there is great growing demand from consumers, customers of companies and public organizations according to PricewaterhouseCoopers study, trust in companies' capability to protect consumers' data is declining, while 36% of consumers are less comfortable to sharing personal data than a year ago. Also, investors are putting more and more interest, especially on the social aspects of how companies perform. Social climbed to the most important ESG priority for US companies, and also the global average saw a notable increase in the importance of social aspects compared to environmental and governance aspects, which have been the most important factors so far. Weeks ago, we saw a major step from the regulator side in Europe when EU's proposal on artificial intelligence regulation, the so-called AI Act, set a global benchmark on how AI systems that pose a risk for safety, security, or fundamental rights could be regulated. And finally, when asking from companies, large enterprises who are putting effort already on responsible AI and their motivations for doing these investments and putting this effort, 62% of these organizations say that the primary reason for pursuing responsible AI was not risk mitigation or compliance, but instead business benefits and growing customer expectations. While 30% were driven by risk mitigation and compliance-based motivations. So I think there is a very good reason to look into how we could embed these growing expectations of better visibility into how we use technology, how we use AI from the ESG perspective. And that's why we looked into how AI has met the ESG reporting by looking into some 130 major companies' CSR or ESG reporting and how these topics are discussed over there. We analyzed a number of mentions of artificial intelligence, machine learning, AI, ML, analytics, and other responsible AI-related terms, and found a clear trend of increasing exposure of responsible AI in companies' ESG reporting. The same trend was also visible when we compared same companies' materiality analysis in their ESG reporting over the last 2 years. So there was increasing materiality or importance in these materiality analysis for many of these companies. So via this analysis, we could clearly identify that there are some industry pioneers who have bravely already incorporated AI in their ESG reporting. And you can see some of these companies over here in these pictures, global, large technology companies. But we are also seeing very active pioneers in many other non-technology industries, for example, financial services, telecommunications, and so forth. By a closer analysis of how these pioneers report actually about their responsible AI as part of their AI ESG reporting, and also by combining these observations with the responsible AI best practices we've learned from research and through our practical experience every day with our customers, we created this framework to help any AI company to repurpose ESG for AI trust and transparency. We build on privacy and cybersecurity that you can see there at the bottom of this slide, as they already are part of normal ESG reporting practices, and suggest 6 domains for comprehensive AI disclosures. Here we can have a better look into all those things that we're interested in each of these domains. So what kind of topics we would like to see, and we encourage organizations who really want to systematically start to report their AI impacts and responsible AI as part of ESG reporting. Let's start from strategy and values. That's basically, we are interested about how AI is used in the company's context as part of their products, services, and processes, for example, in the HR area. And of course, important, what is the responsible AI strategy? How does it integrate with the overall corporate sustainability strategy? Many companies outline ethical AI principles for giving a ground, clear principles on how to connect the values with the AI use in the company. Very important aspect in responsible AI is obviously people and culture related aspects. We encourage companies to report what are the responsible AI or AI ethics roles and the mechanisms for building, upgrading employee skills in addressing questions related to AI ethics and responsible AI. AI team diversity is very important, basically from that perspective that by having more diverse teams, we are very naturally able to address many, for example, equality and non-discrimination related aspects. Also, whistleblowing processes, what are the cultural enablers in a company that help employees to raise concerns related to how we use AI and technology, and then process these going forward. Then we have very much governance-related aspects that we need to take into account in every single AI project that we do. And from reporting perspective, we're interested on what are the key risks related to AI, what are the material risks, and what are the risk and impact assessment policies and processes in place in the company. Many companies are putting in place oversight forums to support ethical and responsible use of AI. That's very interesting from reporting perspective. Transparency standards, documentation standards, and finally, privacy and data security related aspects that we already have established in many ESG reporting. Most importantly, when you look at the right-hand side here, there's no need to invent all the metrics from scratch. So we were able to identify a number of existing ESG metrics which can be repurposed for responsible AI. So I think I'm running out of time. So with this, I hope that I've been able to show how ESG could be used as a platform while building trust for AI, and share some practical tips for how to start addressing it by applying existing reporting standards with some new additions into taking into use ESG as a platform for building trust in AI. Thank you very much for your attention, and really looking forward to continuing our discussion then on these topics further.
Thank you very much, Mary. Yes, there's no need to build from scratch these metrics for responsible AI. We should all collaborate and develop from those who started first. Now we will turn to our second Korean speaker, Hayeon Alex Seo. She is the head of data product at Kakao and was recently appointed as commissioner of the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. At Kakao, Alex operates big data platforms, reviews data across industries, finds business values, and later turns them into new business opportunities. Prior to joining Kakao, she founded data-related startups in Korea and in India with remarkable success. She has been using her vast experiences to mentor startups via Google Korea, DCamp, and Maru 180. Alex will now give a presentation on Kakao's dream of a friendly digital world. It is an absolute privilege to introduce to you Alex Hayeon Seo.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Seo. I actually brought a friend with me from Kakao. That's Lion, the Kakao character. And of course, there are many other famous animated characters from Kakao. These characters represent the human values and the warmth of Kakao. So I'd like to give a brief introduction of Kakao. Kakao was founded about 10 years ago, and it began with a very small group of people, of 5 people. It was a startup back then, and 10 years later, today, it is one of the biggest companies in Korea, and it is one of the biggest companies in Korea as well, and it is also one of the fastest growing companies in Korea. Kakao provides more than 200 services, a total of 210 services, and in the digital world, the vast majority of Koreans are interacting with Kakao services. So Kakao is proud to call itself a digital life platform. So the purpose or mission of Kakao. Kakao began as a startup, and it is now serving most Koreans, and also Koreans living abroad, and also foreigners living in Korea. So it has become a giant mobile platform. And so the responsibility, the accountability, and the role that we play is, of course, something that we think about very much in earnest. And our mission is to make a better world with people and technology. And we have 3 large commitments and responsibilities. Every year, we share how we are implementing these commitments and responsibilities and how we are contributing in a positive way to society. We disclose this in a report on an annual basis. And as Miri just mentioned, we actually saw the Commitment and Responsibilities report cover in her presentation. And beginning this year, Kakao is also disclosing an ESG report. So the commitment and responsibilities are detailed in that ESG report as well. So to go through those 3 commitments and responsibilities, Kakao resolves social issues in its own way. And second, Kakao is a digital life platform, as I mentioned before, and so Kakao is determined to become a responsible corporate citizen in the digital society. And third of all, Kakao is and will continue to be at the forefront of protecting the environment. So what kind of activities we're putting in place to deliver on those commitments and responsibility pledges? I'm not sure I can cover all of them in this very short presentation, but I'll just like to let you know where you can find our efforts to fulfill those commitments and responsibilities. You could refer to Kakao website or Kakao services, and you will see a lot of notifications that will share what we are doing to fulfill the commitment and responsibility. So, in terms of resolving social issues, we are providing navigation services for people with low personal mobility. We are also making efforts to protect children and adolescents from sex crimes, and we are also making efforts to eradicate hate speech. And last but not least, we are implementing many measures and services to help overcome COVID-19 pandemic. And in terms of efforts to eradicate hate speech, for the first time in Korea, Kakao, for the first time as a Korean company, it has declared that it would aggressively respond to hate speech in the digital world, and so we eliminated the real-time search words. So Kakao is a communication messenger, but it also plays a very important role as a search engine. And we have given up on the popular search words. So that was giving up on quite a large part of our business for us. But we hope to contribute to a word that is more safer and more fair and without hate. And of course, users will need something to take the place of the real-time popular search words. So we are providing data trend services instead. So if the users make use of the data trend services, they will be able to see trends regarding the terms or search words that are interested in. And this is something that is quite similar to what you would find on Google search trend. And second of all, commitment and responsibilities for the digital society. All people should be able to enjoy the benefits of digital society, and we are also making efforts to help them make use of the technology. And all of our principles are built into our ethics of algorithm, the charter of the ethics of algorithm. So we are providing AI training and education for all of our employees, for example. And another area that we are focusing very much on is providing a digital world for kids and also user protection. So providing a digital world for kids, in that regard, we are trying to build a healthy digital world. And for sex crimes that target children, we will block users who are perpetrators. We have zero tolerance policy, and we also make use of an AI-based safe bot to detect and block adult content which are harmful to adolescents, and we are continuously updating those safe bots. And for user protection, data and artificial intelligence might come across as something too advanced or too complicated for the layman or layperson. So we made an organization within our company that will continue to orient and let the users know about their rights and their important information regarding algorithms. And lastly, our commitment to and responsibility for sustainable environment. In 2017, we opened the new data center in Ansan. This was focused very much on eco-friendly design. So if we are able to have all of what we have planned implemented, then we will be able to cut back on carbon dioxide emissions by 14%, and green digital services will be provided to enhance our existing services or rebrand existing services to be more environmentally friendly. And so that was a very brief introduction of what we are doing, and I hope to be able to talk about this more in the discussion later on.
Thank you for very inspirational and motivating talks. There are plenty of examples on how technology has great benefits and can help us improve welfare for all. At the same time, there are a lot of topics to address and to discuss. Now, I would like to set the scene for the second Nordic Talks of the afternoon, where we will have a conversation about how tech is having a positive impact on society, industries, and the planet Earth. First, I would like to briefly introduce our panel. Mari Hattaya, CEO of Sidot, live with us from Finland via Zoom. Hayan Alex Seo, Head of Data Product at Kakao. And also, a very warm welcome to the panel, Frode Solberg, Ambassador of Norway to Korea. I would like to remind our audience that this is a relaxed dialogue among speakers, hosts, and you, our audience. And so please remember to engage by raising questions at the live stream website. We have just heard about cases on responsible AI and ESG from Finland, as well as how Kakao dreams of a friendly digital world powered by big data. Frode, would you please share with us some of your thoughts and reflections on today's topic? And can you give us some examples of how you think technology can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in Norway?
Well, I can try to share some experience from Norway as well, but also from my side to Mary and to Alex for sharing their insights from Sidot and Kakao. It's very interesting to listen to what companies are doing to help the SDGs. Speaking more from, let's say, a government point of view, I think I would just like to say that technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, the whole technology area, will of course play a crucial role in how we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. That's beyond doubt. And we need to adapt to a future that we know will be very different than what we experience today. Whether it's then to produce more food, to reduce emissions, to clean up our oceans, technology will be the driver, and artificial intelligence, one of those. Focusing on the experience from Norway, I think we will find many of the maybe most interesting examples from technology drivers and artificial intelligence from the areas where Norway normally has a, let's say, comparative advantage, where we have had a distinct development over quite a few years. That might be the energy area, the maritime sector, aquaculture, oceans mobility, but also maybe areas where we're not so used to thinking about artificial intelligence, like public administration, for example. I think that's one of the areas where you can see the most advances, and maybe that's not sort of present on an everyday basis. And I will try to share some very sort of short and concrete examples how we have coped with a few of this. One being within the healthcare sector, where I think the use of artificial intelligence, the use of computers in general, can, for example, analyze samples and images and recognize differences with a much greater detail and quicker than a human eye, and thus creating quicker responses on diagnosis to actually help save human lives. And that's one of the areas where I think we have made great advances over quite a few years. Computers, artificial intelligence, are also great in finding anomalies, abnormalities, which I think can be used in large-scale computer system, talking about within the finance sector to avoid tax fraud, criminal acts. And why is that important when we're talking about the SDGs? Well, because we can reduce the danger of tax fraud, getting more money in to help us all to achieve what's important, which is the SDGs. I think one area quite interesting for Norway, but is very important for the global society as well, that is within the area of autonomous shipping. I think to reduce emissions and to create what was talked about earlier today, to help the logistics across the world, we need to do some substantive progress within the shipping area. And I think within the autonomous shipping, to both reduce emissions but also to move smarter, that is one of the areas where I think we have made quite a few progresses over the last few years. And not to forget that autonomous ship will also help us to improve safety on board. 75% of all casualties are based on human errors. So we have a lot of impact, and we can make a lot of difference there as well. And just as a minor remark, I can share with you that Norway just now is launching the first education for captains on autonomous ships. Captains staying ashore, so they will actually not be on the ship. They will be controlling their ships with screens, and I think that's a development we'll see in the future. And if I may, one very short but extremely, from my perspective, very interesting example is how we can use technology and artificial intelligence within our aquaculture industry, where we use lasers to recognize faces and patterns on salmon. And doing so, we can follow each and every, from actually when a salmon is born and is ready to be sent to the market, which is a period of 3, 4, 5 years. You can follow that specific fish over that whole period of time to know how it's been fed, any vaccines, whatever that fish has gone through until it reaches the market, and how we can use that information to increase production, to ensure food safety for everyone. That's just a very, very concrete and interesting example of how we can use technology. So I think that there are at least some examples from how we have used AI to improve and to reach our SDGs.
Thank you. A lot is coming out of this conversation. I hope everyone is really enjoying everything that's coming today. So I think Mary mentioned about how the importance of the metrics and reporting of AI, and it's interesting to see how Alex mentioned how Kakao is actually doing the reporting and has future plans to really engage in this global movement to really be transparent with technology and then AI. And if you have bigger influence on more people, I think companies are experiencing that pressure to be really responsible and to give to the world. With that said, data and AI, we talk about privacy and ethics, and that's why the reporting and the metrics are important. And because we're in the earlier stages, it's still, we haven't had the opportunity to have a set standard for these. I would like to talk about COVID-19 and in Korea and the public health surveillance that has had positive effects because we have been very effective compared to many other countries in restricting COVID-19 cases. For example, last week, untraceable cases stood at around 28% in Korea. Alex, as a big data expert with a foot in the private sector, as well as a policy advisor, what are your reflections on this dilemma? And to what extent does Kakao work with data privacy and transparency?
Well, regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, how Korea has made use of its data, I would like to give you a brief explanation on that. In the COVID-19 pandemic, Korea, in terms of disease containment, but also contact tracing, it was at the forefront. And it was possible because of the following 2 to 3 reasons. First of all, from Korea's perspective, this wasn't the first pandemic we were facing in the modern times. So we, so to speak, had a test run and we had lost opportunities previously. So we were able to more actively respond. So just a few years ago, we had the SARS pandemic and we also had the MERS outbreak. MERS was one example where the outbreak had threatened the entire society. And so Korea, after the MERS outbreak, there was a lot of self-review on how to make better use of data to prevent a reoccurrence of such mismanagement. And about making use of data and requesting data, we had legal grounds in place. And I believe that was quite effective in this COVID-19 pandemic. And second of all, Korean society, not only regarding data, but also in general, I believe this is a special way that Koreans deal with issues. So we're very impatient and we want things to be done very quickly. So we want things done first and foremost, at least on a small scale, and then you would gather to talk over what was wrong about that, and we would solve those issues and provide solutions before the issues blow out of proportion. So we have a fast execution and fast review. So that entire cycle was something that we were quite familiar with. And that is why we were able to respond very quickly to this pandemic. And lastly, for all this to run very smoothly, all of the stakeholders and the participants will have to have very active communication, and everyone should have to have opinions being delivered from their own perspective. And as a data specialist myself, data expert myself, I was very aware of what data would be important in tracking contact and what businesses would be holding that data in which form, and whether there would be any issues in terms of personal information protection. I provided opinions on those issues, and so technology experts and data experts like myself and also health experts were able to come together and put forward their opinions to be able to come up with a solution quickly. And if I may go on, part of the question was about what Kakao is doing in terms of data privacy and transparency. I believe I stressed this quite a lot in my presentation earlier. So Kakao began as a very small startup, and over a very short period of time, it has become one of the leading companies in the Republic of Korea. So the employees and executives at Kakao feel very responsible towards society in terms of solving social issues, and they want to help the society by providing technology that can be used to solve the societal issues. So even if the users aren't very conscious about this, the company wants to build very strict rules and invest quite a lot to uphold data privacy and transparency. So one example would be the personal information that is provided by users to the company. So not only at the headquarters, but also all of our affiliates. We call this group of affiliates our community. So all of the personal information that is generated in this community and at headquarters, sometimes they might get mixed up. And in terms of making use of that data and management of that data, there might be problems in that regard. However, we make sure to get informed consent from all of the users and explain in full detail what their data would be used for. So we are giving up on some advantages that other large group companies might enjoy to be able to provide better convenience and safety for our users.
It's really difficult because it's new to all of us, so we have to go through that phase of trial and error. And it's a question that is open to all of us. To what extent will we allow that trial to have influence on our lives? With that, Mary, would you add some comment on what has been said, and like from your European perspective and regarding this dilemma?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really great introduction, and on the Korean experiences and very much reflecting on the same themes, looking from the Nordic and Finnish perspective on this. I think for us this was a totally new experience. So we didn't have too much experience from facing this kind of situations. On the other hand, I think this is an amazing opportunity also for a whole public sector to reflect how do we prepare for potential upcoming crises like this. So first of all, a few things that I hope we are able to learn from this experience is first that already now based on this experience, we need to establish those trustworthy mechanisms and transparency mechanisms for governance and also oversight of technology done by or used by public sector in this kind of crisis situations, because it's clear that we potentially need to do compromises on existing regulations, privacy, But in order to be able to do those decisions quickly and while retaining the people's trust on the government, we really need to have good ways for governing and overseeing those mechanisms and uses of technology. I think also there are many lessons learned on the integration of the contact tracing, automated contact tracing and the human contact tracing. So how technology integrates with the human processes and how do we actually make use of the technology in the most efficient way. So a bit of similar themes. Obviously, we try to learn from Korea and other countries who have had much more experience of and have been more efficient in taking into use this. But I guess this was a great learning for whole Europe and Nordics on that we need to look for good ways for governing and doing quick decisions also on how do we adapt into these kind of situations and make best use of technology to support the humans in addressing the crisis.
Thank you. Now I think, should we take some questions from the audience, please?
Yes, the first question we have is for the Ambassador of Norway. And considering that Norway's economy relies heavily on oil, what can AI do to help protect the environment and ensure the green transition? And here we would also like to hear some input from the rest of you, what technologies can help in aiding the green transition.
Well, thanks for that question. I think whether it's within the energy area or outside the energy area, I think technology and to use technology as a combined expression, whether it's within artificial intelligence or not, I think technology in general will make a huge contribution. Having said that, I think that fossil fuels still will be a part of the energy mix for quite some time. But we have used technology in order to reduce emissions in the production, showing that for example, we use technology in our newest oil fields in Norway now, which shows that the emissions per produced barrel is only 5% of the world average. So that shows that the importance of technology even within the production of fossil fuels. But we also see in the transition towards other energy areas like our hydro energy area or the development of offshore and onshore wind, which is a huge development in Norway for the time being. But technology also in how we can prepare and how we're entering into a green future in general, not only with regard to energy, but also how we can become better in reducing unnecessary travel, how we can reduce unnecessary waste, how we can optimize transportation, logistics, and so on. So I'm 100% sure that whether it's an energy focused economy or not, the use of technology, the use of artificial intelligence will be extremely important in that green transition. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Maybe Mary, do you have some other comments you would like to add?
That was a very comprehensive view to this. I don't have too much to add. I'm also looking forward to move more towards more real-time reporting of the environmental impacts in our different processes and of companies. So I really look forward to also actually getting help from AI on how we report about the environmental impacts, and not only yearly level, but also on a real-time level, and giving that way better visibility, more real-time visibility into the environmental impacts. Also, one aspect that hasn't been discussed so much yet, but I think what is growing interest in the area of AI is the environmental impacts of training our AI systems. So that's something that we need to keep in mind while taking training large AI systems, taking AI more into use in so many different areas.
maybe before we move on to the next question, maybe Alex, do you have something to add or no? Okay, we can move on to the next question.
Okay, this is a question for all speakers. What do you think that the ideal design of an act on AI would entail to protect both consumer rights and the business environment?
Maybe could you repeat the question?
What is the ideal design of an act on AI to protect both consumer rights and business environment?
So the question was how do we delve with this idea of protecting consumer rights as well as the business environment? Maybe, Alex, do you want to tackle this question?
So it's not particularly regarding artificial intelligence, but there are recently many efforts being made and many discussions taking place on my data, and I think that would be a very good attempt. My data means not the data principle, but the companies, in terms of their production or in terms of their business activities, they would generate and store data of the data principles. And the data principles might be isolated from the use of data, or the data might be used solely from the perspective of the company. So the users should be able to have their data provided to organizations that they choose in the way that they want the data to be delivered. So this is giving more data ownership to the users, and I think this works both ways for the user and also the company.
Idea and concept of my data, does this exist in your countries, Mary and Frode? Maybe Frode first.
Well, thank you. Well, yes, it does. I think that you have the right to access your own data. What's out there of information regarding yourself. But I think it's a very good question. But I think it's a very difficult question to answer, at least in a short roundtable or a short discussion like today. Because I think this is when you're talking about legislation, an act that should encompass everything. That is the core of the difficulty that many governments are looking into. But I think at least, if not the ideal answer perhaps, but at least that it's part of the whole value chain, both regarding consumers and governments and producers and commercial life. It has to be, they have to adapt to the same kind of network, the same kind of framework. And that is, of course, a governmental and perhaps also an international responsibility to establish a network or a framework that is possible, that can encompass as much as possible. But I think also that when you're creating legislation, whether you will find the ideal, it's always some kind of compromise. But it has to serve all purposes, and that is, of course, to find the right balance. That's challenging, but that it's part of the whole value chain, I think, is a key, at least one of the key areas that we need to find.
Before we move on to, shall we move on to the last question?
Yes, the last question is about how to ensure diversity in AI. And then to both our Finnish and Korean speakers, how do you ensure that there is enough diversity in your teams where you're working, and that this is represented in the work that you do on AI?
So the question was, how is diversity reflected in AI, and especially in Korea, in the work?
Also in Finland, I would like to compare the two experiences.
And in Finland. So maybe Marie, you can go first.
All right. So very good question, and that is one of the most powerful means for ensuring non-discrimination and equality of AI. So I think any recruiting decisions are very important from this angle. That's always an opportunity. And we should make an extra effort in order to get applications from diverse applicant groups. So paying attention to that one. But also, I would like to raise that it's not only about the internal team. We have so many opportunities to engage with or find those groups from outside the organization with whom we can engage while developing these systems in order to bring in more diverse voices. So in addition to this, paying attention into how we use recruiting as a means for increasing diversity, I also want to really encourage any organizations to take the opportunity of actually engaging with your stakeholders, potential users, and pay attention to actually engaging with those maybe smaller user groups while doing so.
Maybe Alex, you do.
네. 아마 모든 조직의
So,
해답이 아닐 수는 있겠습니다.
this might be the right answer for all organizations, but at Kakao,
국민들이 쓰는 서비스이다
so this is a service that is used by almost all Korean citizens.
영리 조직 입장에서
So as a
떨어지거나
profit-seeking company, even if there is less profitability or less revenue, we look at groups that are isolated, that are underprivileged digitally or economically marginalized. And we also tend to overlook the children, but they are vulnerable and they are easily overlooked. So we focus on making services that will be inclusive of those children as well. And as we provide services for different groups, we would collect data from different populations and groups, and we would do AI research and apply what comes of that research to remove and prevent any distortion or
I think
discrimination.
we are running towards the closing of this event soon. But before we do that, why don't we go around the panel, and if you could please share what call to action or final statements that you want to highlight from today's discussion. Frode, you want to go first?
Well, thank you very much. I wish I could come up with something extremely new and exciting right now, but I think when we're talking about artificial intelligence and the need for a technological change, I think, as has been mentioned before today, I think the access to enough education, not only education, but also training, that we can share, that we have the possibility to also train. But there's something else I always come back to when we're talking about whether it's SDGs or how to, because the SDGs is all about changing and entering into a future where we need to do something. And for me, that is the totality and the very single one. To use with the single one, we have to do something, we have to change ourselves. I think when we're talking about change, we have a tendency to look at everyone else, the governments, companies, whatever, they have to change for us. But we have to change ourselves, we have to do something. And in order to achieve and reach the SDGs, we have to change. But we have to pull together. So if there's one thing I think that always stands out when we're facing challenges, it's cooperation. So I think the importance of pulling together, and the importance of cooperation, I think that's key to me.
Thank you. Alex?
네, 저도 대사님 말씀에
Yes, I agree
공감하고요. 그리고
fully
저는 한 가지
with
또 말씀드리고 싶은 거는
Mr. Ambassador, and I would also like to say that I think I did touch upon this in my presentation about rebranding services.
비전이 참 예쁜 말이 하나가 있어요. 그래서
There's a very nice phrase that goes with one of those eco-friendly products that we have rebranded.
간결한 아름다움.
A very simple beauty that we have borrowed from the earth. And that is the basic vision for our eco-friendly products that we are developing. And my point here is that people and nature and the earth, all things,
지속해 나가는 것이고 그래서
are trying to sustain their lives, and data and AI,
어떤 존재, 기술이라고
they're not that different.
동떨어진 것들, 우리가 모르는 것들,
They're
어떤 미래
not
것들이 아니고
things that are unfamiliar to ourselves. They are part of our lives.
데이터를 우리 삶의
So I would like to say
부분으로 받아들이자. 함께
that
살아가는
data
모습을
should
배우자.
be accepted as part of our life
Thank you.
in a sustainable future. Thank you.
Mary? give us
Very
your last
good
word?
advice from both of the previous speakers. Maybe I would just complement that with embracing the pace of how quickly technology develops and how complex the socio-technological systems are. So I would really want to encourage everyone to embrace the opportunity to engage with your stakeholders and not to try to anticipate everything in advance, but sort of learn to react quickly, learn to listen the feedback and identify the impacts based on what you hear from your stakeholders, and then react to those ones. So openness and learning from our stakeholders and the users is, I believe, absolutely important as the technology and socio-technical systems are getting more and more complex.
Thank you. I like the quote, "The only thing that does not change is change itself." I think we are living through a very turbulent times, and I think we see a repeating theme of the importance of education and training for all. Not only is it important for companies and governments and these bigger stakeholders to lay the groundwork to give access to these individuals with the knowledge and the access to resources that may empower them. But at the same time, it is important, very important for individuals, every one of us, to be interested and accept that data and AI is now part of our lives. And we will continually collaborate and talk about what is to come, because the present will make the future and will soon become the past. So we, the Nordics and Korea, should work together to drive innovation and learn from each other's experiences and success cases. This is what Nordic Talks Korea is all about. Today, we have learned that many good things are already going on in both the Nordic and Korea, but we also have learned that there's a lot of room for improvement. We hope that this event will be a step on the way to even more collaboration that will lead to a fast, innovative, and just digital transition in the Nordics, in Korea, and beyond. Before we conclude today's program, we must not forget to thank our great partners. Without you, this event would not have been possible. So, from the bottom of our Nordic hearts and Korean hearts, thank you to Seoul Metropolitan Government, the Oil Tank Culture Park, the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and Girls in Tech Korea, and not least, the Nordic Council of Ministers. Also, thank you to all speakers and to the great audience for a very interesting session. Our next event will take place in the fall of 2021, and we'll zoom in on the topic of air pollution's impact on health. I look forward to seeing all of you there, and I strongly encourage you to stay tuned and sign up to our newsletter and become part of the growing Nordic Talks Korea community on www.nordictalkskorea.com. Thank you. 감사합니다. Well done. Thank you.